We're going to be looking at the Molecular Modeling and Lewis Structure Lab today. Now you'll notice that this lab also has several parts. What you're going to be doing in the second half is just putting together several different structures using the balls and the bonds that came in your kit. The first part is going to be making sure that you've done the electron counting correctly for the other sections. So there will be a little bit of adding coming up. So let's begin. You should know by this point, because of the lab, you should know about structure and bonding. This is kind of a lot of fanciness right in here where they're talking about the really like fancy bonding. But all you need to know for this part of the lab is how to do single bonds and double bonds and triple bonds. You know how to electron count, so you can get through this section really, really fast. And the little dots represent the number of electrons. Don't worry about the numbers at the top of the columns per se. You know about Lewis structures. You've learned about how to stick things together with Lewis structures. You've learned what all the dots mean. And then this is about drawing Lewis structures. So again, this is all a review. You've already done this, so don't think of this as like new material. But maybe if you were struggling before, this might be another perspective that might make it easier for you. So we've got all the different Lewis structures. Then we have resonance structures. So there's a little bit about resonance structures. And again, you've already learned about those. You've learned about the exceptions to the octet rule because some things can have more than more than 4. They can have up to 6. And then this section right here, this is that VSEPR section where you're learning, and it's like a reminder that there are a lot of different molecular geometries and molecular geometry names, like bent, trigonal, pyramidal. They don't even have all of the trigonal bipyramidal in this chart, but you still need to know it for your quiz and test. And then here's some information about the kits. So it should look like that. It's usually really helpful to sort them by color. You'll see how to do that coming up. Notice right here that the pink lone pairs are represented with those dots. So each pink sphere-like looking thing, teardrop thing, represents 2 electrons. You don't ever want to leave this without those on or you'll lose points. So like if you have a structure you've drawn and it has some of these open holes and you don't have anything in them, you should be putting the lone pairs in them. And then finally, you'll do a few that have 2 atoms, like for a double bond. So also note that there are like 2, well, you might have more than 2, but there are a small number of like long flexible bonds, and then there are these short bonds. The long flexible bonds should only be used for double or triple bonds. They should not be used as single bonds. You should use these little tight, sturdy ones for single bonds. All right, and now materials wise, yeah, you're just gonna need something to take pictures with, your pen or paper, and your sheet of paper. And then here's just a reminder of what your modeling kit should have in it. If for some reason you're missing one, pick something similar and just kind of like make it work. So the red one has 4 holes and the yellow has 4 holes. So you could like make those work for each other. If you were missing something that has 6 holes, there aren't any other options for that, but you could take this yellow one with 4 holes and then like make sure you make a note in your notes that this is what you did, and then like try to just set the other bonds in there as though it had the 6 holes. You shouldn't be missing any pieces, but I'm just letting you know. All right, and then when you're actually doing the lab, so the first part of the lab has to do with learning how to use the kit. This is very helpful. I would watch that real short video. Again, it takes time. So recommendation is that on day 1, you complete the questions in the tables. There's tables in this experiment and at the beginning of the next one. Then day 2, build half the structures, and then day 3, build the other structures. There are no pictures in this section to upload to the assignments Dropbox. And they have these labeled by name. If you happen to use blue instead of red, I'm probably not going to be upset. I just care about the shape. But I mean, if you can, it'd be great if you matched all the colors up. All right, so in step 6, make sure that you take your own picture. There's going to be a screenshot in the example. Make sure you have your own picture. or it used to be in this example. Maybe it isn't in this example right now. So what you want to do in this section is you're going to start right here. You're going to describe the structure of this ion and you'll answer the questions. And then you're going to determine the valence number and put your answer in data table 1. So this is how it looks. So you're just going to count up all the valence for all of these. You're going to fill it in here. And then it says atoms and lone pairs. Well, it has a hydrogen and 2 oxygens. So it has 3 atoms. And then you will have to figure out how many lone pairs based on your drawing. So if you just want to put 3 instead of atoms, bonds, because we tend to say bonds instead of atoms. If you want to put 3 bonds, comma, or you could just do 3B, comma, and then however many lone pairs, 1 lone pair, 2 lone pair, however many there are. That should match up with a structural geometry name. You shouldn't have to do a lot of work looking for it. If you've got, this comes from our section on electron regions. So if you've got a certain, like when you add the 2 numbers together, that tells you what region you're in. And then within those regions, the number of bonds, the number of lone pairs tells you what the shape should be. Structural geometry is molecular geometry. So it's all of the names, like there are like 11 names, like bent and those kinds of names. Make sure you're doing that. This lab says structural, but they mean molecular. And notice that there are photos right here. And you'll just upload those pictures. That's the model. And then here's the photo. Make sure that your photo has a back and forth arrow and that it has a picture on each side of the arrow because this has resonance. Let's go on to the next section. Experiment with the Lewis structures. So you will be putting a few things into the Dropbox, the assignments Dropbox. After step 1, you're just going to have the picture of your bag containing your model parts. So you can just, put them in there at the end. After step 10, before you build the very last structure, take a halfway picture built of it. Notice that this is an I and then a CL together. That's an easily mistakable one. After step 10, a picture of your paper with your signature and scribbled out structures because you're going to have to draw the structures and then you can build them. It works a lot better that way. This might help you if you get confused on data table 2. Go ahead and just get started on it. If you get confused, come back and watch this video. And I'm going to bring up data table 2 so you can kind of see both things at once. So data table 2. So this is the first one, CCl4. So first question is valence electrons. Remember, if you look at the column C is in, it has 4. And then chlorine, its column, it has 7. Notice that there are 4 of them because of the little subscript 4. So that's 28. So when you add them together, you get 32. My recommendation is to go down this column, filling it out first. Then when you're asking about the total atoms and lone pairs, it means the total electron regions around the atom. So it has no lone pairs. It has 4 bonds, so it has 4 regions. So you'd put a 4 here. And then you can also, like 4 regions. And then you can also put, in parentheses, if you want to help yourself, you can say that there were 4 bonds. And after you draw the picture, you'll see there aren't any lone pairs, 0 lone pairs, parentheses. It's okay for me if you just want to put the 4, but for your structures, it might be helpful for you to go ahead and include that extra information. Remember, again, this is the structural geometry name, not the geometry. It's the same as molecular geometry. So you need to have bent. All those extra choices should be falling in this category. And I'll tell you, if you don't see bent when you go back and look at this table at least one time, then you have used the wrong names. You haven't used the molecular geometry names. So here's a list. It's coming up. There's a list of molecular geometry names that you want to use. And here's some tying into shapes if you need some help. This is from class, ties into shapes. All right, so for step 10, wait, let me show you how many there are. We scroll on down. So there's those ones. Now, it might feel like this is a useless exercise, but you're actually going to be putting together these ones. So it should not be useless. It should be helpful. All right, because like, look, photo 3, that's your CCl4. 44, photo 4 is your water one. Please make sure you line these up. It is crazy trying to grade these if you don't have them lined up and in the right spot. So make sure your picture you're labeling and that you are uploading the CO2 is actually CO2 and not water, which was the picture before, right? All right, so here's some things for your pictures. We need the signature on the paper that you place the model upon. Then you take the picture. Make sure you've got your signature in the picture. You are going to just scribble the previous structures out. Don't use lots of papers and just draw a new one. And this is actually what you'd have done in probably the first table for this data table, the very first one. You probably were drawing out the structures while you're doing this. So maybe if you spread them out on your paper, then you can just kind of set the model you design like right by it and make sure you sign under every one of them if you do it that way. Remember, you draw a line for bond. Don't use two dots, lines, or bonds. Don't leave the lone pairs off your structures. Those are those flat, oval, peach-colored pieces. You lose points if the structure you're building don't have those. The double bonds need two gray pieces coming out, and each is worth a point on your lab. Actually, it's 2 points. You lose half a point. I think you lose 1 whole point. I need to go back and double check it. It should be worth 2 points. So this might be changed and say 2 points when you come back and look at your actual lab. So hopefully that gets you through a lot of it. Again, reminder about the teardrop shape. Don't leave it out. Here's a data table reminder about this third column. So see carbon, this was the first one I was saying, like that's the regions. Actually, this is the bonds, that's the lone pairs. Here's the bonds and lone pairs. So you can do it like that too. Just make sure it's clear whether the first number is bonds or if the second number is bonds versus lone pairs. All right, the farthest right data table is labeled structural geometry. Again, that's molecular. Here's the list of moleculars if you aren't sure. So there's your list. Again, this is confusing the very last structure right here. This is ICl5. And then finally, SO2, it can be corrected for formal charge. This is really good for you to try this. Use the shape that has 5 regions. It's one of the right ones at this time. And see if you can't correct it for formal charge. So again, that's right over here. Because that's really good practice. Finally, again, before you put the kit away, look at your pictures. Are there any holes in the plastic spheres in your pictures? Make sure they're filled up. Question 1, do not write CO2. That is not a resonance structure. It has a double bond. This is a common mistake people make. And you should write down all 3 examples from the lab for question 4. Not question 4. I guess that's for question 3. Yeah, it's question 3. That's question 3. All right, so hopefully that gets you through this lab and it makes more sense. The lab is all about just building structures and practicing your molecular geometry.